Well, we think of, as we read the Bible and we read this, what is a compressed narrative. There were lots of days where Joseph got up and Joseph put on his sandals and Joseph picked up his tools and Joseph went to the work site and Joseph hit his thumb with a hammer and Joseph put his thumb in his mouth and didn't say words and came back home and he did all those things. And really, life is about little things. It's really about little tiny things. Well, the name of this sermon is The Joseph Show. It's last year when we celebrated Christmas. We all appreciate the fact that Mary was the center of the show. We thank and honor her for her part in the Christmas story. And as I said earlier in another sermon, she got the directions and she chose to go along with it exactly as it was planned, without so much as a single adjustment in what would happen. There's lots of heroes of the Bible that God said, do this, and they said, well, can I do it another way? Can I change it? If you remember the story of Moses, Moses was at the burning bush. God said, here's what I want you to do. Go and save my people. And he said, well, I don't speak very well. Can I have an adjustment? Well, he actually didn't want to go, but God allowed him to have Aaron be the spokesperson. And there's a lot of other examples too, but not her. She said, behold, the bondservant of the Lord, may it be done to me according to your word. And she was still serving Jesus when he was having his ministry. She was the ones standing at the cross. And she was a faithful servant in the early church. If somebody said to her that wanted to worship her, she would have said no. She would have said, I'm a sinner just like you. I'm in need of a Savior as much as anyone else. If you come to me, I'll point you to Jesus. Well, I was researching about Mary going to Bethlehem, and I said, why would Mary have to go to Bethlehem? A census at that time was used by Rome to figure out how to tax people and how to get people in the army. They were looking for men. So why did she have to go? So I did some research, and one of the people said, well, she was a strong woman, and she decided she wanted to go, and that's what she did. And I thought to myself, as I read that comment, what the person was saying is she demanded her way and she got it. And I said, I'm sorry, that's not the Mary of the Bible. She was the bondservant of God, and she was not like King Saul, who demanded his own way and was stripped of his kingship because of it. She understood that God knew best, and the trials were for a purpose, and that was the way she was going to do it. She put his will first place in her life. What people fail to notice is that when she returned to Nazareth, after she visited Elizabeth, so 3 months of visiting, she arrived there, and it was the end of the story for her. Now, I'm not saying that she wasn't the center of the story, she was. What I'm saying is, she was no longer had any say in the process. She was truly the role of a bondservant, and she was just doing whatever is sent her way. All of the decisions were removed from her and given to Joseph as the leader of the home. And I want to look at who was charged with receiving all the instructions and carrying them out. Because there was a bunch of them, and they had to be done, and a good and a faithful person had to be chosen to do them. And that person is Joseph. And it's time we gave him the credit he was due. He become the stepfather of Jesus, and he would bear the shame, whatever that particular flavor was, for the rest of his life. Now, it was all a surprise to him because he never saw it coming at all, and he got the announcement in a dream. We read that it was announced, and as Mary got to meet Gabriel and ask questions, he just got a dream that here's the dream, here's the information, go with it, work with it. Now, I'd like to look at all the other dreams he had too, and to do that we have to look at both Matthew and Luke's accounts of the events. Well, number one is the answer to his dilemma. That's Matthew 20 and 21. It said, but while he was considering that's the fact that Mary was pregnant, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child that she has conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. And Joseph, in verse 24, awoke from his sleep and did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, and took Mary as his wife. Now he had a dilemma on his hands. He'd chosen what he thought was the most virtuous virgin in the village for a wife, and 3 months ago she went off to visit Elizabeth, and when she came back she was pregnant and she had a story for the ages. So what was his options? Well, if you read the earlier verses, he decided to divorce her quietly and send her away, which was a kind thing to do. All that changed when he had the dream, and now the mantle of control passed to him. He took her as his wife, and now he was responsible for all the decisions on her behalf. As you know, the Jewish law, the man was responsible. I was reading the story of Samuel, and if you remember Samuel, Hannah, his mother, had no children, and she came to the temple every year, and she was praying, and she prayed that if she could have a child, she would give the child back to God, which was a great thing, right? But her husband had to okay that. The law was that if he said, if we have a child, we're going to keep it, that was the end of the story. There was nothing she could do. No, she promised, no, that's the way it is. So, that was the end of it. The decisions of her life were now in the hands of Joseph. For better or for worse, she said to Gabriel, I'm all in. She had no idea how good this good man was, and she just trusted God for the whole process. Well, the answer is that he was well chosen, and he did well by her, as well as any man could. Now he'd taken 6 months of guff, or whatever you would call him being in Nazareth for 6 months, and all the gossip that was swirling around him. And he took that from everybody in the village, and including possibly his parents and her parents. Well, we know that the pressures of life can sometimes get to you. And if you remember the story of Peter, the apostle, he had some, they call them Judaizers, Jewish people that wanted Christians to behave like Jews, came and he followed them. And Paul called him out on it, to the point that he did it in front of everyone. In fact, he put it in the scriptures, and we can read it to this day. So if Peter can fail, it's likely that Mary's parents and Peter's parents, or Joseph's parents, could fail too. Well, number two is the decisions on a trip. Luke 2:4-7 says, Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and the family of David, in order to register along with his wife, who was engaged to him and was with child. And while they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in cloths and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Now, I was always wondering why he didn't go up by himself to Bethlehem. Why he didn't say, look, it's going to take me 5 days to go up. I'll be a couple days paying the tax or the register for the census, and I'll be back 5 more days, and it'll be a week, 2 weeks. I'll be back. Why didn't he do that himself? Why did he have to bring her because she wasn't part of the census? Well, it is possible that both of them understood the scriptures, where in Micah 5:2 it says, "For as for you, Bethlehem Ephraim, too little to be among the clan of Judah, from you the one will come forth from me to be the ruler of Israel. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity." That's the reference that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. And if you remember when the Magi came, they looked that up and they said it's in Bethlehem. Well, if they understood that, well, they would have went to Bethlehem for that reason. But we don't know that. There's nothing in the Bible that says, well, Joseph and Mary understood the prophecy and knew that they had to go there. And I wondered, why would they travel so late with her pregnant? Why didn't she just stay? And I did a little research and from experts and regular people and to question. And somebody said, well, it's all a myth anyway, nothing of that happened, so I dismissed that. But some other people, which I thought was a more reasonable explanation, is Mary's parents wouldn't condone her being in the house. And so he had to take her. So, for whatever reason, Joseph made the decision, and they had to live with him. Some people thought that he was from Bethlehem, and that he had traveled to Nazareth to get work, and he, of course, met Mary there, and all of that happened, but they figured he had family, and possibly they didn't want him either. And that's why they ended up in a stable with a manger. Now, Joseph, if you continue to read on in Luke, there's a command that on the 8th day the child shall be circumcised, and you will name him. And he named him Jesus, as he was commanded. And then on the 40th day, he brought him to the temple to, the firstborn had to be dedicated to the Lord and a sacrifice given, and he did that too. Now, these were things he was supposed to do. And if he chose not to do them, Mary would not have overruled him in the matter. And we have to be thankful that he did them. Well, number 3 is a bunch of decisions. If you look at Matthew 2:13-14, "Now when they were gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there till I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him.' So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night and left for Egypt." Now, if you remember, in verse 11, we didn't read it, but it says, "And coming into the house, they saw the child." So Joseph had obviously got them a house, and they were living in a house, and people wondered how long they lived there. And the question would be, you were in Bethlehem, how long was it? And it was probably more than a year, but less than 2 years. And as I say, some people thought Joseph was in Nazareth because there was work there. there was a big city being built near Nazareth, and so a lot of construction would have been going on. A lot of people would be employed. They'd need a lot of skilled tradesmen. Now, another thing that happened was he decided to stay in Bethlehem after Jesus was born. And at that point, he had a second dream. An angel came with the words that you must leave right now, flee, because he's going to destroy him. And Mary was not part of this until he woke her up and said, we got to go now. We got to get you out the door. Now, the information I read was that they were going to Egypt, and I wondered about that. And if I said to you, you're going to Yugoslavia, you'd want some idea of where to go in Yugoslavia. And the person that said that the likelihood is they went to Alexandria because there was the largest Jewish population there. They would go to people that they would have the same language. They would go to people that would give them a chance. So it was a month. It was 400 miles. It would take a month to walk there. But Joseph also knew that it's possible that there were soldiers coming for him. And this person said they could have gotten a ship and gone to Alexandria in 2 days. And so they had the money, the gold from the Magi. They could have boarded a ship, and in 2 days they would have been in Alexandria. And I thought to myself, well, there's another decision that Joseph had to make. He was also told to stay there until Herod was died, and then he was to return. So that was another thing he had to keep in mind. He wasn't to get too comfortable because Jesus was to live in Israel. So number 4 is head back home. In verse 19 it says, when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother and came into the land of Israel. Well, you know that we skipped part of the story where it's not a nice story. Herod got angry because the wise men, the Magi, had tricked him, and so he sent soldiers to kill all the boys 2 and under. Now, some experts said, well, this never happened. It's not a real story. It's because it's only recorded in Matthew. How come there aren't other sources? Well, the answer to that, other people said, was Bethlehem was a very small place. So there would be a very small amount of 2 and under baby boys. And so maybe it was only 10 children. Maybe less were killed. Now that was, I'm not saying it's any less worse, but it would not get a lot of publicity outside that small area. And so some accounts say that Herod died 4 to 5 years after Jesus was born, so that would mean that they spent 2 to 3 years in Egypt. But other experts say it was only a couple months after they had left. They weren't there hardly any time. And it says that Herod died very painful death, which of course some people would say was appropriate for the evil he'd done. In his privates, he had gangrene and maggots were eating at these, so extremely unpleasant. Now, whatever is right, Joseph received more directions in their dream to return to the land of Israel. As I said earlier on, this was Joseph's show, and he was in charge of the life they lived and what that life would look like. Now, obviously, God was in charge, and he chose an obedient servant who would fulfill the prophecy that said, in verse 15, "Out of Egypt I called my son." So he fulfilled that. So Joseph made it happen, and upon returning, he had another problem: what to do with the evil son of Herod. Now, there's a story that Herod knew he was hated. He was universally hated. And there would be celebrations when he died. People would not be sad. And so he made an arrangement that the day he died, he wanted soldiers to go out through the city and randomly kill 2,000 people. The city would be in mourning. Even if they weren't mourning for him, there would be mourning in the city. And his son made it happen. 2,000, and Josephus recorded that happening. So, in verse 22, it said, when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judah in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go up there. Then, after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee and came and lived in a city called Nazareth, which was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophets: he shall be called a Nazarene. So he was given another dream to go, and now it said to go to Galilee, but he went to Nazareth, which fulfilled the prophecy. Now, if you remember the comment in John 1:46, Nathanael, that was one of the disciples, said, when he heard that Jesus was from Nazareth, he said, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Well, that's a colloquialism. It was kind of a slur. Nazareth was not a good place. Did not have a good reputation. If you remember, years ago, St. John was called a union city, which meant if you were doing a job, you had to pay union wages. And it was also called a dirty city and a smelly city. And part of the smelly city part was because the pulp mill was right there downtown. Those are all slurs, and the same was true with Nazareth. And you think to yourself, well, why would he go there? Well, he would go there because there was work available. And I expect he didn't want to inflict the gossip that would happen on Mary and his family, but somebody has to make the hard decisions, and he decided that he could go there and have a job and feed his family. So what's the conclusion? Well, this is a story about Joseph and how he was required to care for his family. That clearly shows that God expected him to shoulder that responsibility. And we would expect no less of him. He's a minor figure with a major role in the growing up years of Jesus. Now, one of the biggest things that predict if a man, with a child, a boy, when he grows up to be a man, whether he end up in jail, one of the major factors is if he has a father in the home, he's likely not going to end up in jail. But if he's fatherless, he will. And the same is true for if the woman doesn't have a father in the home, she'll spend her life looking for a father figure. And she won't find one until she finds Jesus. The point of this sermon is that we're required to do a lot of regular, boring stuff. That no one, you think, well, no one will remember that stuff. It's just regular, boring stuff. When my kids were growing up, on Tuesday nights, we would go to Highfield Square. There was a car show there. And we'd go and we'd look at the cars. I'd take my old car there. And we'd look at the cars, and we'd walk around, and then we'd go into the mall, and I'd buy one box of rosettes. And I would pass them out, and walk back over to the mall and walk around the cars and go home. Nothing really important. But my girls remember that they liked the fact that we did that. Now, those seemingly unimportant things you do, you would think no one would even notice, are major things for a non-Christian who is watching. Anyone could do something for a few minutes, but you can't continue it. If you have a big stomach and you go, and you hold it, you can't hold it forever. It's going to come back down. And when you smile for a photograph, you're going to just, okay, as soon as the photograph is taken, you stop smiling. But we're called to have the joy of the Lord. We're called to continue to do those small things that are Christ-like every day, all the time. Because people are watching. Someone around you may be watching your Christian walk to see if it's real, even when you think no one else is watching. Your witness in those times when you don't know that someone's watching, and they see you, should still be Christ-like. Well, Joseph was that man. And God chose him to carry his life load in front of Jesus as he grew up. All those tiny, unimportant things. As a carpenter, with Jesus, would amount to a whole life of doing the right thing. And that's what God calls us to do. To do the ordinary, regular, unimportant things for our whole life, because people are watching all the time. Our children are watching, everyone's watching. And one of those unimportant things we do, seemingly unimportant things, is we have communion. And we remember that Jesus died and rose again. And it reminds us that those small things, even though it's just small, it's important.